You're here because of charity. My father's words sliced through the wedding reception like a blade through silk. 200 guests watching. My brother frozen at the head table. And me, standing there in my military dress blues, reduced to a beggar in front of everyone. But my new sister-in-law did something that night that changed everything. What she revealed made my father's face turn white as the wedding cake behind him. My name is Colonel Catherine Morgan, and I spent 18 years building a life from the ashes of family rejection. From sleeping in my car at 18 to commanding 800 soldiers, from waiting tables for tips to earning medals for valor. Every month for years, I sent money home to the family that threw me away. Covered their emergencies, answered their calls. Stayed loyal to people who erased me like a mistake. But when my father tried to humiliate me at my brother's wedding, thinking I was still that helpless teenager he'd discarded, he learned exactly how wrong he'd been about everything. Ever been dismissed by someone you'd give anything for? Someone whose approval you chased until you realized you were running toward a cliff? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone in this pain. Before we dive deeper, drop a note about where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up to family who underestimated you, if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who should have seen it all along, tap that subscribe button, because what happened next at that wedding reception might just give you the courage you need. The warning signs were everywhere in my childhood, scattered like broken glass across what looked like a normal suburban life. From the outside, we were the perfect family. 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. Family portraits on the mantel. Church every Sunday in our pressed clothes and practiced smiles. But inside that house, love was rationed like water in a drought, and I was always last in line. My father's approval came wrapped in conditions I could never quite decode. The rules seemed to shift depending on his mood, the weather, or some invisible scorecard only he could see. When I was 7 and brought home my first report card, all A's with a gold star from my teacher, he glanced at it for exactly 2 seconds before setting it aside. "Your brother got straight A's plus citizenship awards when he was your age," he said, returning to his newspaper. "Keep trying." When I scored the winning goal in my soccer championship at age 9, running to him on the sidelines with my trophy raised high, he was deep in conversation with another parent about their daughter's violin recital. He patted my head absently and said, "That's nice, honey. Did you see how Sarah's team made it all the way to state finals?" The trophy suddenly felt heavy in my small hands, like I was carrying something that didn't belong to me. The favoritism wasn't the dramatic kind you see in movies. There was no evil step-parent, no Cinderella locked in a tower. It was subtler than that, woven into the fabric of our daily life so carefully that questioning it felt like questioning reality itself. My siblings got new bikes for Christmas. I got my brother's old one, repainted pink to make it special. They got driving lessons the day they turned 16, scheduled and paid for without question. When I turned 16, my father handed me the driver's manual and said, "Smart girl like you can figure it out from the book." When college brochures started arriving our junior year, my father sat down with my sister every evening for a week, spreading applications across the dining room table like they were planning a military campaign. They discussed SAT prep courses, campus visits, early admission strategies. They made lists and spreadsheets and color-coded calendars. When my college materials arrived, he stacked them on the kitchen counter next to the grocery coupons and expired pizza flyers. "You'll figure something out," he'd say when I tried to bring up application deadlines. "You always do." "That's what I like about you, Catherine. You don't need hand-holding." I told myself it meant he had faith in my independence. I convinced myself it was a compliment, that he saw strength in me he didn't see in my siblings. Now I understand it meant he'd already written me off. I wasn't worth the investment of his time or attention. I was the expendable child, the one who could be set aside without much loss. The mockery started small, almost playful at first. When I joined the debate team in middle school, excited about learning to argue cases and think critically, he called it arguing for sport and laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. When I volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, spending my Saturdays cleaning kennels and socializing scared dogs, he told his friends I was playing with puppies instead of getting a real job like her responsible siblings. Every interest I developed, every achievement I earned, every small step toward becoming my own person got filtered through his lens of dismissal. I joined the school newspaper and he called me Lois Lane in a tone that made it clear this wasn't a compliment. I learned to paint, and he asked if I planned to starve like those artists in Paris. I wrote poetry in secret journals hidden under my mattress because I knew he'd mock verses that came from my heart. My mother would shoot him these warning looks across the dinner table when his comments cut too deep. But she never said anything directly, never defended me, never suggested he might be too harsh. The unspoken rule in our house was that Dad's opinion was the family opinion, and challenging it created ripples none of us wanted to navigate. She'd sometimes squeeze my shoulder after a particularly brutal dinner conversation, a silent apology that meant nothing because it changed nothing. I remember the exact moment I realized his respect was transactional, something to be bought and sold but never freely given, at least not to me. I was 15, working my first real job bagging groceries at the local supermarket. It was exhausting work, standing for 8 hours, dealing with impatient customers, cleaning up spills in aisle 7. But I was proud of myself. I was earning my own money, contributing to my college fund, proving I was responsible and mature. I came home after my first week, exhausted but glowing with pride, waving my first paycheck like a flag of independence. $42.17 after taxes. It might as well have been $1,000 for how rich I felt. My father barely looked up from his recliner where he was watching the evening news. "About time you started pulling your weight around here," he said, his eyes never leaving the television. "Your sister's been babysitting since she was 13. Your brother's been mowing lawns since he was 12. You're already behind." The paycheck suddenly felt smaller in my hands, the numbers shrinking before my eyes. I'd thought earning my own money would prove something to him, that I was responsible, mature, worthy of his notice and maybe even his pride. Instead, it became another measuring stick I'd failed to meet soon enough, another way I was less than my siblings. His temper was like weather in our house, unpredictable but inevitable. You learn to read the barometric pressure of his moods, to recognize the signs that a storm was building. A certain set to his shoulders when he walked through the door meant someone was about to get dressed down for leaving a dish in the sink or forgetting to take out the trash. The way he folded his newspaper with sharp, aggressive creases meant the rest of dinner would be eaten in silence, broken only by the sound of forks against plates. I developed an early warning system, a complex network of observations and reactions designed to keep me safe from his verbal storms. The sound of his car in the driveway would send me to my room. The tone of his voice on the phone would determine whether I ate dinner with the family or claimed I wasn't hungry. The angle of his jaw when he read the mail told me whether I could ask for help with homework or should figure it out myself. But sometimes you got caught in the storm anyway, despite all your careful preparations, and his words could strip you bare faster than any physical blow ever could. "You're too sensitive," he'd say when I'd flinch at his criticism, tears threatening to spill. "The world's going to eat you alive if you don't toughen up." Is this how you're going to react when a boss critiques your work? When life gets hard? You need thicker skin, Catherine. But toughening up in his eyes meant becoming smaller, quieter, less trouble. It meant not asking for things, not money, not time, not attention, not love. It meant not expecting much from life and being grateful for whatever scraps came your way. It meant not taking up space he'd rather give to someone else, someone more deserving, someone who better fit his vision of what his children should be. The control was everywhere once I learned to see it, like invisible strings attached to every aspect of our lives. He decided what music played in the car, even on my birthday. He chose what shows we watched on television, dismissing any suggestions with a wave of his hand. He determined where we went on family vacations, always places he wanted to see while we pretended to be excited about Civil War battlefields and historical monuments that meant nothing to us. Our opinions were welcome as long as they aligned perfectly with his. Disagree, even slightly, and you'd get a lecture about respect and knowing your place and how children these days don't understand gratitude. I learned to swallow my thoughts, to nod along with ideas I found ridiculous, to smile when I wanted to scream. It was easier than fighting. It was safer than resistance. I watched my siblings navigate this landscape with varying degrees of success. My brother learned to mirror Dad's interests with uncanny precision. He studied sports statistics he didn't care about, memorized car specifications for vehicles he'd never drive, learned to deliver political opinions with the same harsh edge Dad used. He became a carbon copy and Dad loved him for it. They'd sit together watching games I knew my brother found boring, bonding over a performance of shared interest. My sister perfected the art of agreeable silence. She became a ghost in her own home, present but not really there. She'd nod along to Dad's monologues, smiling at appropriate intervals, keeping her real thoughts locked away where they couldn't cause trouble. She dressed how he liked, dated boys he approved of, chose a college major he suggested. She disappeared into the daughter he wanted her to be, and I watched her real self fade away like a photograph left in sunlight. I tried both approaches, but neither fit right on me. When I attempted to engage with his interests, to fake enthusiasm for things that bored me, he'd quiz me like I was taking a test. Oh, you like football now? Who won the Super Bowl in 1987? What's a nickel defense? Name 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks. When I couldn't answer fast enough or correctly enough, he'd smirk and say, "That's what I thought. Stick to your little art projects." When I stayed quiet like my sister, melting into the background, he'd accuse me of sulking or being ungrateful or having an attitude. "What's wrong with you now?" became his favorite question when looking at me. Not "how was your day?" or "what are you thinking about?" but "what's wrong with you?" It suggested there was something fundamentally broken that needed fixing. Something that made me different from the rest of the family in ways that disappointed him deeply. The worst part wasn't the criticism itself. I could handle harsh words. I'd built up calluses on my heart from years of them. The worst part was the growing certainty that nothing I did would ever change his mind about me. I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, become president, and he'd still find a way to diminish it. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like I was a problem he couldn't solve. A project that hadn't turned out the way he'd hoped. A bad investment that kept demanding resources. Other parents came to my school events. They sat in the audience beaming with pride, taking pictures, embarrassing their kids with enthusiasm. My father showed up when it was convenient, left early when it wasn't, and spent most of the time checking his phone or talking to other parents about their kids' achievements. At my 8th grade art show, where I'd won first place for a painting I'd worked on for months, he stood in front of my work telling another father about how his son had gotten into the gifted program. I don't know where she gets it from. I heard him tell my art teacher once when she was praising a sculpture I'd created. Must be from her mother's side. No one in my family wastes time with that stuff. As if my creativity was some random genetic accident that had nothing to do with him, something to be dismissed rather than celebrated. By senior year of high school, the foundation of our relationship had cracked beyond repair. Every conversation was a minefield where the wrong word could trigger an explosion. Every request for support, whether financial, emotional, or just basic acknowledgement of my existence as his daughter, was met with sighs and rolled eyes and comments about how some children don't know how good they have it. I started making plans that didn't include him, didn't include any of them. College applications filled out in secret at the library. Scholarship essays written on the computer at school because I didn't want him to see them and mock my ambitions. Dreams crafted in the spaces he couldn't reach, in the hours before dawn when the house was quiet and I could imagine a different life. I was 18 and learning that sometimes protecting yourself means building walls around the things that matter most. That sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. That sometimes love is supposed to be unconditional. But some parents attach so many conditions that the love gets lost in the fine print. The distance between us grew wider as graduation approached. While my classmates talked about family celebrations and gap year adventures bankrolled by proud parents, I calculated how many hours I'd need to work to afford community college. While they showed off graduation gifts, cars, laptops, promises of paid tuition, I hid the fact that my parents hadn't even asked which college I'd chosen. "You're on your own now," my father said when I got my diploma. The words delivered like he was doing me a favor. "Time to see what you're really made of," as if that hadn't been true for years already. As if I hadn't already been surviving on my own while living under his roof. I should have known then that our breaking point was coming. The tension in our house had become unbearable, crackling like electricity before lightning strikes. Every interaction carried the weight of everything left unsaid. All the hurts accumulated over 18 years. All the ways we'd failed each other, all the love that had been conditional when it should have been free. But I was still naive enough to think that family meant something unchangeable. That blood created bonds strong enough to survive disappointment and strong enough to bend without breaking. I still believed that underneath his criticism and control, there was a father who loved me. He just didn't know how to show it in ways I could recognize. I was wrong about all of it. The fight that ended everything started over something small. It always does. The big breaks in families don't come from grand betrayals or dramatic revelations. They come from small moments that reveal truths too big to ignore anymore. I'd applied for a summer program without asking his permission first. It was a leadership conference for graduating seniors interested in public service, held at a college 3 states away. It was competitive. They only accepted 50 students from across the country. It was fully funded by a non-profit organization, so it wouldn't cost my parents anything. It was an honor to be selected, the kind of thing that should have made any parent burst with pride. I hadn't told him about the application because I knew he'd mock it. Say something about how I thought I was too good for regular summer jobs, how these programs were for rich kids who wanted to feel special. I hadn't expected to get in anyway. But when the acceptance letter came, when I saw my name on that official letterhead saying I'd been chosen from thousands of applicants, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt proud of myself. He found the letter on my desk while I was at work. I came home to find him sitting at the dinner table with it spread in front of him like evidence in a trial. The rest of the family was already seated. My mother nervously moving food around her plate, my siblings studying their laps like they contained the secrets of the universe. What is this? He held up the letter and his voice had that particular edge that meant the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. It's a leadership program, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. For students interested in public service, I was accepted. I can read, he snapped. What I'm asking is why you thought you could make a decision like this without consulting your family. Without asking permission? Without considering how this affects anyone but yourself? I tried to explain about the application deadline. How competitive it was, how I hadn't wanted to get anyone's hopes up when the chances were so slim. But every word I spoke seemed to make him angrier. His face getting redder, his jaw getting tighter. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, standing up from the table so suddenly his chair scraped against the floor. You think you're better than the rest of us. You think you can just do whatever you want without consequences. You think the rules don't apply to you. What rules? I asked, and maybe there was too much challenge in my voice. Maybe I was tired of pretending I understood his invisible expectations. The rule that says I need permission to apply for educational opportunities? The rule that says I can't make decisions about my own future? Which rule did I break, Dad? Don't get smart with me. He was standing now, using his height to tower over me, to make me feel small. You want to make adult decisions? Think you know better than your parents? Think you don't need this family? The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. Here was an opportunity that could change my life, that recognized my potential in ways he never had. And he was treating it like a personal insult, like my success was somehow an attack on him. I'm trying to build a future, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Isn't that what you always told me to do? To stand on my own feet, to not expect handouts? That's what this is, me creating opportunities for myself. You're 18 years old, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that was worse than yelling. You don't know anything about the real world. You don't know what's best for you. But if you're so grown up, if you're so independent, if you know better than the people who raised you. The words that came next would echo in my head for years. They were delivered with the cold precision of someone who'd been thinking them for a long time, just waiting for an excuse to say them out loud. Then you can figure it out on your own. Pack your things. You've got until morning to get out of my house. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went white as paper. My siblings stared at their plates like they could disappear into them. And I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, the world tilting in ways that made me dizzy. You're kicking me out? My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Because I got accepted to a leadership program? I'm kicking you out because you've made it clear you don't want to be part of this family, he said, sitting back down and picking up his fork like we were discussing the weather. You want to be independent? Congratulations. You're independent. Starting tomorrow. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, to intervene, to remind him that throwing out your child was extreme even for him. But she just stared at her plate, her hands shaking slightly as she cut her chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. Mom, I said, hating how young I sounded, how desperate. Your father has made his decision, she said quietly, never looking up. Perhaps some time apart will help everyone calm down. Time apart, like I was going to summer camp. Like this was temporary. Like families could throw away their children and call it a cooling off period. I wanted to argue, to fight, to find the magic words that would make them see how insane this was. But the look in my father's eyes told me it was already over. This wasn't really about the program or the letter or me making decisions without permission. This was about all the ways I'd failed to be the daughter he wanted, all the disappointments that had been building for 18 years. The letter was just an excuse to do what he'd probably wanted to do for a long time, cut loose the child who didn't fit. So I went to my room and packed. My hands shook as I folded t-shirts and jeans, as I gathered the few things that felt like mine in a house that had never really been home. No one came to help. No one knocked on my door to say this was all a mistake. The house was quiet except for the sound of the television from the living room. My father watching his shows like nothing had happened. I packed my entire life into garbage bags and a single suitcase. The kind of luggage that tells the world you don't belong anywhere. My art supplies. My journals. The few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me before she died. Clothes that would have to last however long this exile would be. I left behind the things that belonged to the family. The laptop they'd bought for school, the phone on their plan. The childhood trophies that proved I'd once been someone they were proud of. In the morning, I stood at the front door with my pathetic pile of belongings, hoping against hope that someone would stop me, would say this had all been a terrible mistake, would remember that I was their daughter, their sister, their family. My father read his newspaper at the kitchen table like it was any other Tuesday, his coffee steaming beside him in his favorite mug. World's best dad, a Father's Day gift from years ago when we all still believed it might be true. My mother washed dishes with unusual intensity, the water running louder than necessary, drowning out any words that might have been said. My siblings had already left for school, escaping before they had to witness the final act of this family tragedy. "Do you have everything?" my mother asked without turning around, her voice carefully neutral. "I think so," I said. Though how could I have everything when everything included 18 years of being someone's daughter? "There's a shelter on Madison Street," she said, still scrubbing the same plate she'd been washing for 5 minutes. "If you need somewhere to go, a shelter." My mother was recommending a homeless shelter to her daughter. The woman who'd given birth to me, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and read books and brush my teeth, was sending me to a shelter like I was a stranger who'd wandered in looking for directions. "Thanks," I said, because what else could I say? "Thanks for the 18 years. Thanks for the recommendation. Thanks for nothing." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I'd ever known. I stood on the porch where I'd played as a child, where I'd waited for the school bus, where I'd sat with my first boyfriend nervously holding hands. Now I stood there with garbage bags at my feet, 18 years old and utterly alone. The morning air was cool on my face, carrying the smell of cut grass and normalcy from the other houses on our street. Neighbors were leaving for work, kids were walking to school, the world was continuing its rotation as if mine hadn't just stopped. I wanted to scream at them that something terrible was happening, that a family was breaking apart right in front of them. But I just picked up my bags and started walking. I made it 3 blocks before the tears came. Ugly, body-shaking sobs that made me drop my bags and lean against a stranger's fence, trying to remember how to breathe. A woman walking her dog crossed the street to avoid me. A jogger glanced at me with concern but kept running. The world had no time for 18-year-olds crying on sidewalks with their lives in garbage bags. But as I stood there, snot running down my face, makeup I'd carefully applied that morning streaming down my cheeks, something else rose up beside the grief. Something harder and stronger and more useful than tears. Anger. Not the hot, impulsive anger of a teenager, but the cold, determined anger of someone who'd just been shown exactly where they stood. They didn't want me. Fine. I didn't need them. I'd been taking care of myself for years anyway. Working jobs, figuring out school, navigating life with minimal support. The only difference now was that I didn't have to pretend we were a family anymore. I didn't have to keep trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, picked up my bags and started walking again. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a plan beyond surviving the next hour the next day. But I made myself a promise as I walked away from that house, from that family, from 18 years of not being enough. I would not let this define me. I would not let their rejection become my truth. I would build something from these ashes, even if I had no idea what that something would be. I had no idea then that it would take 18 years to prove it. No idea that the girl with garbage bags would become a woman with medals. No idea that rejection was about to become the greatest gift they could have given me, even though it felt like death at the time. But first I had to survive. And survival, I was about to learn, was its own kind of victory. The first month after being thrown out was like learning to breathe underwater. Every moment was a struggle against drowning, and I kept forgetting that I didn't have gills. I crashed on friends' couches at first, rotating between the few people who knew my situation and felt sorry enough to offer their spare rooms and sofas. But charity among teenagers has its limits, and those limits usually show up around week 2 when their parents start asking uncomfortable questions. "My mum wants to know how long you're planning to stay," my friend Jessica said after I'd been sleeping on her basement couch for 10 days. Her voice was apologetic but firm. "She says she's sorry about your situation, but she can't be responsible for someone else's kid." Someone else's kid. That's what I'd become. A problem that belonged to nobody. A responsibility nobody wanted to claim. I packed my bags that afternoon and moved to another friend's house, where I lasted exactly 1 week before her father said I was becoming a disruption to their family routine. After I'd exhausted my short list of friends willing to help, I spent 3 nights sleeping in my car, a beat-up Honda Civic I'd bought with grocery store wages. I parked in different places each night. The 24-hour Walmart parking lot, behind the abandoned movie theater. Once in the parking garage of the hospital where I figured security wouldn't bother someone who might be visiting a sick relative. Those nights in the car were the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. Every tap on the window could be police or worse. I'd curl up in the back seat with my coat as a blanket, trying to find a position that didn't make my neck ache, trying to ignore the voice in my head that whispered, "This is your life now." This is what happens to girls whose fathers don't love them. The days were almost worse than the nights. I'd wash up in gas station bathrooms, using paper towels and hand soap to approximate a shower. I'd put on makeup in my car mirror, trying to look normal enough that nobody would guess I was homeless. I'd go to the library and pretend to study while really just enjoying the air conditioning and the fact that nobody could kick me out until closing time. I found a studio apartment after 3 weeks of searching, a cramped space above a pizza restaurant that reeked of garlic and grease. The walls were so thin I could hear every conversation from the apartment next door, every footstep from above, every argument from the street below. The heat barely worked in winter, and in summer, the single-window unit air conditioner wheezed like a dying animal. But it was mine. $400 a month that might as well have been $4,000 for how hard it was to scrape together. But it was an address, a door with a lock, a place where I could exist without apology. The landlord was a man named Frank, who looked at me with the kind of pity that made me want to disappear. "You got family, kid?" he asked when I handed him the deposit in crumpled bills. "No," I said, the word coming out easier than expected. "No family." He nodded like he'd heard this story before. Probably had. Probably rented to dozens of kids like me who'd been thrown away by the people who were supposed to love them most. "Rent's due on the 1st, he said. "Don't make me come looking for it. I got a job at an all-night diner called Mel's, the kind of place where the coffee was bitter enough to wake the dead and the pie was good enough to make up for it. The manager, a woman named Rosa who'd clearly seen everything life could throw at a person, hired me on the spot when I said I could work any shift, any day, holidays included. "What about Christmas?" she asked, testing me. "Especially Christmas," I said, and something in my voice must have told her everything she needed to know because she just nodded and showed me where to get my uniform. The work was harder than anything I'd done before. 8-hour shifts on my feet, carrying trays that got heavier as the night wore on, dealing with drunk customers at 2 a.m. who thought waitresses were there for their entertainment. My feet developed blisters that turned to calluses. My back ached constantly. My smile became a mask I put on with my apron, something that had nothing to do with how I actually felt, but it paid the bills barely. Between rent, utilities, and food, I had maybe $10 left at the end of each month if I was lucky. I ate at the diner when Rosa wasn't looking, taking home leftover pie and cold French fries that would have been thrown out anyway. I learned which grocery stores marked down their meat at what times, which day-old bread was still good, how to make a single can of soup last 2 meals if you added enough water. The loneliness was the hardest part. It was physical, visceral, like a constant ache in my chest that no amount of busy work could cure. I'd find myself standing in the cereal aisle of the grocery store at midnight, tears streaming down my face. Not because I couldn't afford breakfast, but because there was nobody left who cared whether I ate it. Nobody to call when I had a bad day. Nobody to celebrate with when I got a raise of 25 cents an hour. Nobody who would notice if I disappeared completely. I'd walk past families in the park and feel like I was watching them through glass, observing a species I no longer belonged to. Mothers pushing children on swings, fathers teaching kids to ride bikes, siblings fighting over ice cream. Normal family things that now felt as foreign to me as life on another planet. The mental replay was torture. Every night when I couldn't sleep, which was most nights, I'd relive that last fight in excruciating detail. I'd imagine different versions where I said the right thing, where I apologized, where I convinced them to let me stay. But every imaginary conversation ended the same way, with the understanding that this had been coming for years. The leadership program was just the excuse. The real reason was that I'd never been the daughter my father wanted, and we'd all just been pretending otherwise until we couldn't pretend anymore. I wrote letters I never sent, long, rambling things where I poured out every hurt, every memory of feeling less than, every moment when their love felt conditional. I'd seal them in envelopes addressed to home, then throw them away the next morning when daylight made me realize that words couldn't fix what was broken between us. My 18th birthday came and went without acknowledgement from anyone but Rosa, who noticed the date on my employment paperwork and brought me a piece of chocolate cake with a candle stuck in it. "Make a wish, kid," she said, and I wished for the only thing I wanted, to stop caring about people who didn't care about me. The wish didn't come true. It never does when you wish for the impossible. I saw my family once during those first months by accident at the grocery store. My mother was comparing prices on pasta sauce. My sister beside her looking at her phone. They looked exactly the same, like my absence hadn't changed anything about their lives. I ducked behind a display of canned vegetables before they could see me, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone in the store must hear it. I watched them through the gaps between soup cans. These people who used to be my family, and realized they looked happier. My mother was laughing at something my sister said. They looked relaxed, unburdened, like a problem had been solved. Like the family equation finally balanced now that I'd been subtracted from it. I left my half-full basket in the aisle and walked out of the store, driving home with shaking hands, understanding for the first time that they weren't missing me at all. They'd moved on seamlessly, probably converted my bedroom into something useful, probably sat down to dinner each night without an empty chair to remind them someone was missing. That night in my studio apartment, listening to the couple next door argue about money and the pizza ovens rumbling below, I hit bottom. Not dramatic bottom, not suicide attempt bottom, just the quiet bottom where you realize you're completely alone in the world and nobody's coming to save you. You can either give up or get up, but staying where you are isn't an option anymore. 6 months into my exile, I walked past the military recruiting station for the first time. I wasn't looking for it, wasn't thinking about the military at all. I was walking home from another grueling shift, my feet screaming in my worn-out shoes, when I saw the posters in the window. Young people in uniform standing tall, looking like they belonged somewhere, like they were part of something that mattered. I stopped and stared at those faces for a long time. They looked proud, confident, like they'd found their place in the world. They looked like they had purpose beyond just surviving another day. They looked like everything I wanted to be but didn't know how to become. The recruiting office was closed, but I came back the next day during my break. The recruiter was a woman named Sergeant Rivera, mid-30s with the kind of bearing that made you want to stand up straighter. She had eyes that seemed to see everything, and a smile that suggested she'd heard every story but was still willing to listen to yours. "What brings you in?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit down. "I saw the posters," I said, which wasn't really an answer but was all I could manage. "The posters are nice," she agreed, "but they don't show the hard parts. The training that makes you want to quit, the deployments that take you away from everything familiar, the discipline required to succeed. Why are you really here?" I could have given her the rehearsed answer about wanting to serve my country, about patriotism and duty and honor, but something about her directness deserved honesty. "I need to belong somewhere," I said. "I need to matter. I need to prove that I'm worth something, even if the only person I'm proving it to is myself." She studied me for a long moment, taking in my exhausted eyes, my waitress uniform, the way I held myself like I was ready to run if this went badly. "How old are you?" she asked. 18. "Family support?" "No family." She nodded slowly. The military can give you purpose, structure, education, and a future. But it's not easy. It's going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. It's going to demand everything you have and then ask for more. Some people break. Are you going to break? I thought about sleeping in my car, about gas station bathrooms, about watching my family live happily without me, about every moment of the last 6 months when breaking would have been easier than continuing. No, I said. I don't break. I just bend a lot. She laughed, a genuine sound that made me like her immediately. Bending is good. We can work with bending. Breaking, not so much. She walked me through the options, the different branches and specialties, the education benefits, the career possibilities. She showed me charts and statistics and testimonials from other recruits. But what really sold me was what she said at the end. The military becomes your family, she said. Not metaphorically, literally. The people you serve with will have your back in ways civilian friends never will. They'll trust you with their lives, and you'll trust them with yours. It's the kind of bond that can't be broken by disagreement or distance or even death. Once you're in forever. Forever. The word I'd thought applied to biological family but had learned meant nothing when blood relations decided you weren't worth keeping. But maybe, just maybe, chosen family could mean what birth family was supposed to mean. I didn't sign up that day, or even that week. I went back several times asking more questions, getting more details, making sure I understood what I was signing up for. Sergeant Rivera was patient with my hesitation, understanding that this wasn't a decision to make lightly. I'm going to be honest with you, she said during my 4th visit. Based on your test scores, you could qualify for some excellent programs. Intelligence, medical, even officer training eventually. You're smart. You could do a lot with that intelligence in the military. Nobody's ever called me smart before, I said without thinking. Then immediately wished I could take it back. Then they weren't paying attention, she said simply. I've been doing this job for 10 years. I can spot potential. You've got it. The question is whether you're ready to do something with it. I signed the papers the next week. The commitment felt enormous and liberating at the same time. I was signing away years of my life to an organization I barely understood. But I was also signing up for something bigger than my small, sad story of family rejection. I was choosing to matter, to serve, to become someone worth respecting. I gave my notice at the diner, and Rosa hugged me when I told her why. You're going to do great things, she said. I can feel it. Don't forget us little people when you're running the world. I sold the few pieces of furniture I'd accumulated, packed my belongings back into the same suitcase I'd left home with, and prepared to disappear into a new identity. The night before I left for basic training, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I drove past my childhood home one last time. The house looked exactly the same. Same mailbox with the dent from when my brother hit it with his bike. Same rose bushes my mother tended with obsessive care. Same basketball hoop where my father had taught my brother to shoot. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could see shadows moving inside. My family having dinner, living their lives, completely unaware that I was outside looking in. I didn't see anyone clearly, didn't know if they ever talked about me or wondered where I was. For all I knew, they'd told people I'd gone to college or moved away for work. Some sanitized story that didn't involve a father throwing out his daughter for the crime of independence. I sat in my car for maybe 10 minutes, engine running, trying to feel something definitive. Rage or sadness or closure or forgiveness. But all I felt was tired. Tired of wanting their love. Tired of replaying our failures. Tired of being defined by their rejection. Goodbye, I said out loud to the house, to the family inside, to the girl who'd once believed she could earn their love if she just tried hard enough. I hope you're happy. I hope it was worth it. I hope you never realize what you lost. I drove away without looking back, heading toward a future that had nothing to do with them. I didn't know then that it would be 18 years before I'd see any of them again. Didn't know that the broken girl leaving in a beat-up Honda would return as a decorated colonel. Didn't know that rejection would transform into the greatest gift they could have given me. All I knew was that I was done trying to earn love from people who had none to give. It was time to find out what I could become when I stopped making myself small enough to fit their expectations. Basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, was like being broken down to your smallest parts and rebuilt into something useful. The drill sergeants didn't care who you'd been before you arrived. They didn't care about your family drama or your sad story or your feelings. They cared about whether you could follow orders, push through exhaustion, and become part of something larger than yourself. The first day was designed to shock you out of civilian thinking. They shaved our heads, stripped us of our clothes and identities, dressed us all in identical uniforms until we looked like copies of the same person. We were no longer individuals with histories and heartbreaks. We were recruits, raw material to be shaped into soldiers. I don't care if your mommy didn't love you enough. Drill Sergeant Matthews screamed in my face during the second week when I'd faltered during a 10-mile ruck march. I don't care if your daddy didn't hug you. Your personal sob story means nothing here. What matters is whether you can carry your weight and protect the soldier next to you. Can you do that, Morgan? Yes, Drill Sergeant, I screamed back, shouldering my 50-pound pack despite legs that felt like jelly. Then prove it. Move. And I moved. I ran when my body screamed to stop. I did push-ups until my arms gave out, then did 10 more. I cleaned latrines with a toothbrush, stood at attention for hours in the South Carolina heat, learned to disassemble and reassemble my weapon blindfolded. Every task was designed to push us past what we thought we could endure. But here's what I discovered in that misery. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. All those years of emotional endurance had prepared me for physical hardship. All those times I'd swallowed harsh words had taught me to absorb the drill sergeant's screaming without taking it personally. All those years of being told I wasn't enough had built up a reserve of stubborn determination to prove everyone wrong. Morgan! Drill Sergeant Rodriguez called out during combatives training. You fight like you're afraid of hurting someone. This is war training, not a tea party. Your enemy won't hesitate to kill you. Stop holding back. She was right. I'd spent so many years making myself smaller, less threatening, less noticeable. But here, that instinct would get me or someone else killed. I had to learn to take up space, to be aggressive, to fight like my life depended on it, because someday it might. My squad became the family Rivera had promised. We were 12 women from completely different backgrounds. A former teen mom from Detroit, a ranch hand from Montana, a valedictorian from Manhattan, a high school dropout from Miami. None of us would have met in civilian life, but trauma bonding through basic training created connections deeper than anything I'd experienced. When Private Chen fell behind during a night march, we all fell back to help her. When Private Washington's grandmother died and she couldn't attend the funeral, we all stood with her while she cried. When I got a perfect score on the weapons qualification, they cheered like it was their own achievement. Because in a way it was. We succeeded or failed as a unit. This is your battle buddy, Drill Sergeant Matthews announced, pairing me with Private Jessica Tomlin, a tough-talking girl from Boston who joined the army to escape a dead-end life of poverty. You are now responsible for each other. If she fails, you fail. If she succeeds, you succeed. Her problems are your problems. Her victories are your victories. This is what family means in the army. Jessica and I couldn't have been more different. She was loud where I was quiet, aggressive where I was cautious, street smart where I was book smart. But we balanced each other perfectly. She taught me to stand up for myself without apologizing. I helped her with the written tests she struggled with. We pushed each other through every challenge, neither willing to be the reason the other failed. Why'd you really join? She asked one night during Firewatch. Both of us standing guard while the rest of the barracks slept. My family threw me out, I said, surprised by how easily the truth came. Needed somewhere to belong. Mine didn't throw me out, she said, but they might as well have. Mom's a junkie, Dad's in prison. Brothers are heading the same way. I looked at my life at 18 and realized if I didn't leave, I'd end up just like them. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Graduation day from basic training was a celebration of transformation. 10 weeks earlier, we'd arrived as civilians with no direction. Now we stood in perfect formation, soldiers ready for advanced training and whatever came after. The reviewing stand was full of proud families taking pictures, waving signs, crying with pride. My section of the stands was empty, of course. No one had come to see Catherine Morgan graduate. But as I stood at attention with my squad, I realized I wasn't alone. Tomlin's family hadn't come either. Neither had Chen's or Rodriguez's. We were the orphans of Charlie Company, bound together by absence as much as presence. After the ceremony, while other graduates took photos with parents and siblings, we took pictures of each other. 12 women in crisp uniforms standing tall, having survived something that breaks 30% of those who attempt it. We were each other's family now, and that was enough. More than enough. Advanced individual training for military police took me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. If basic training broke us down, AIT built us back up into specialists. We learned law enforcement, combat techniques, investigation procedures, crowd control, detention operations. Every day brought new challenges that required both physical strength and mental acuity. I discovered I had a talent for it. Years of watching my father for danger signs had taught me to read people, to spot trouble before it escalated. Years of navigating emotional minefields had given me the patience to de-escalate tense situations. Years of being dismissed had taught me to pay attention to details others ignored. "Outstanding work, Private Morgan," Captain Harrison said after I'd successfully talked down a role player threatening suicide during a training scenario. "Where'd you learn negotiation skills like that?" "Personal experience, sir," I said, not elaborating that I'd spent 18 years negotiating for basic recognition in my own home. I graduated AIT with honors, earning my first commendation for academic and practical excellence. As I pinned on my new rank of Private First Class, I thought about my father, wondered if he'd be proud or find some way to diminish this achievement too. Then I stopped wondering, because it didn't matter anymore. I was proud of myself, and that had to be enough. My first assignment was to the 42nd Military Police Company in Baumholder, Germany. I was 20 years old, had never been on a plane before joining the army, and suddenly I was living in Europe, responsible for law enforcement on a base housing 10,000 soldiers and their families. The work was challenging and varied. One day I'd be directing traffic at the main gate, the next investigating a barracks theft, the next providing security for a visiting general. Every shift brought new problems to solve, new skills to develop, new ways to prove I belonged here. Staff Sergeant Williams, my squad leader, was a tough but fair woman who'd been in the army for 12 years. She took me under her wing, teaching me not just the technical aspects of the job, but the politics of military life. "You're good at this," she said after I'd handled a domestic violence situation with particular skill. "But being good isn't enough if you want to advance. You need to be visible. Volunteer for the hard assignments. Take additional training. Get your degree. The Army rewards initiative, but you have to show them you want it." So I did. I volunteered for every difficult detail. From prisoner transport to VIP protection. I enrolled in online college courses, studying criminal justice during my off hours. I took additional training in combat life-saving, investigative techniques, Arabic language basics. Every certificate, every completed course, every successful mission went into my personnel file, building a case for promotion. The promotions came steadily. Specialist at 2 years, sergeant at 4, staff sergeant at 7. Each rank brought more responsibility, more soldiers under my command, more opportunities to prove that the girl who'd been thrown away was worth something after all. My first deployment came in 2006, 15 months in Iraq, during some of the worst fighting of the war. Nothing in training had prepared me for the reality of combat zones. The constant threat of IEDs, the suicide bombers, the mortars that fell like deadly rain at random times, the heat that made you feel like you were breathing through wet wool, the sound that got into everything, equipment, food, lungs. But I was good at it. Maybe because I'd grown up in a different kind of war zone, where emotional explosions were as unpredictable as roadside bombs. I knew how to stay hypervigilant without exhausting myself, how to read situations for danger, how to keep functioning when everything felt unsafe. "Morgan, you've got ice in your veins," Lieutenant Cooper said after I'd maintained security during a mortar attack, keeping my soldiers calm and in position while explosions shook the ground around us. "Where does that come from?" "Practice, sir," I said, not mentioning that I'd learned to stay calm during explosive situations at my father's dinner table. I saved a soldier's life during that deployment. Private Jackson stepped on a pressure plate IED during a patrol. The explosion took his leg and sent shrapnel through his torso. While others froze in shock, I ran forward with my combat lifesaver bag, applying tourniquets, packing wounds, keeping him conscious until the medevac arrived. He lived because I didn't hesitate, because all those years of acting under pressure had prepared me for that moment. They gave me a Bronze Star for that action. As the colonel pinned it on my uniform, I thought about my father reading about military honors in the newspaper, wondering if he'd recognize my name, wondering if he'd feel anything at all. I came back from Iraq different. Harder in some ways, softer in others. I'd seen death up close, held dying soldiers' hands, written letters to grieving families, but I'd also seen incredible courage, selfless sacrifice, bonds between soldiers that transcended everything else. I understood now what Sergeant Rivera had meant about military family. These people would die for me and I would die for them. That's stronger than blood. My second deployment was Afghanistan. 2009, running detention operations at Bagram Air Base. It was different from Iraq. The mountains instead of desert, different enemy tactics, different challenges. But the core remained the same. Do your job, protect your people, complete the mission. I was a sergeant first class by then, responsible for 30 soldiers. Their well-being was my primary concern, making sure they stayed alert but not paranoid, professional but not inhuman, strong but not brittle. It was like being a parent to 30 armed adults in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. "You take care of us, Sarge," Specialist Davis said one night after I'd spent hours helping him work through a Dear John letter from his girlfriend back home. "Who takes care of you?" "You do," I said, and meant it. "We take care of each other. That's how this works." The promotion to Master Sergeant came after that deployment. Recognition of leadership under extreme conditions. Then First Sergeant, then Sergeant Major, then the commissioning program that would take me from enlisted to officer. Each advancement felt like another step away from the girl with garbage bags. Another piece of evidence that I was worth something. Officer Candidate School was its own kind of basic training, breaking down everything I knew about being enlisted and rebuilding me as a leader. The academic requirements were intense. Military history, tactics, leadership theory, ethics. But I'd been taking college courses for years by then, had finished my bachelor's degree and started my master's. I was ready for the intellectual challenges. "Why do you want to be an officer?" the board asked during my commissioning interview. "Because I've learned that good leadership can save lives and bad leadership can destroy them," I said. "I've served under both. I want to be the kind of leader that soldiers deserve, someone who sees their potential even when they can't see it themselves. Someone who pushes them to be better while still protecting their welfare. Someone who earns respect through actions, not just rank." I didn't say that I wanted to be the opposite of my father, who'd used his authority to diminish rather than build up, who'd seen leadership as power over others rather than responsibility for them. But maybe they heard it anyway because I was selected for commissioning. Second Lieutenant Morgan was 28 years old, 10 years into her military career, with combat experience and leadership credentials that made up for her young age. The same colonel who'd pinned on my Bronze Star now pinned on my lieutenant bars. "You've come a long way, Morgan," he said. "Where do you see yourself in another 10 years? "Wherever the army needs me, sir," I said, which was the expected answer. But privately, I had bigger dreams. I wanted to make colonel, maybe even general. I wanted to be in positions where I could make real changes, could ensure that soldiers like the one I'd been, lost, rejected, desperate for purpose, had the leadership they deserved. The years that followed were a blur of assignments, each one building on the last. Company commander in Korea, battalion operations officer at Fort Hood, brigade staff at the Pentagon. Each position taught me something new about leadership, about the complexity of military operations, about the balance between mission accomplishment and soldier welfare. I deployed again to Afghanistan as a major, this time as a battalion executive officer responsible for 600 soldiers. The weight of that responsibility was immense. Every decision I made affected hundreds of lives, thousands if you counted their families back home. But I was ready for it. Every harsh word from my father had prepared me to handle criticism without breaking. Every moment of feeling unsupported had taught me to be the support others needed. Every rejection had built my determination to never give up on soldiers who were struggling. The promotion to lieutenant colonel came at my 15th year mark, faster than typical but not unheard of for officers with my record. Combat experience, advanced degrees, commendations for leadership excellence. My personnel file was everything my father had said I'd never be accomplished, respected, valuable. I was stationed at Fort Bragg when the wedding invitation arrived, forwarded through military mail from my previous assignment. My name and rank on an envelope with my brother's return address. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, trying to imagine what had prompted this contact after 17 years of silence. Inside was an elegant invitation to his wedding, taking place in our hometown, in the church where we'd been baptized and confirmed, where our family had sat in the same pew every Sunday pretending to be perfect. At the bottom, someone had written in careful script, "We'd love to have you there if you can make it. No apology." No acknowledgement of the years of silence. No explanation of how they'd even found me or why they'd decided to include me now. Just a casual invitation, as if I'd been away at summer camp instead of exiled from the family. I set the invitation on my desk and stared at it for days, changing my mind hourly about whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to give them the same silence they'd given me. Another part was curious about who they'd become, whether they'd changed, whether they ever thought about the daughter and sister they'd thrown away. But the biggest part, the part that won in the end, wanted them to see who I'd become. Not for their approval. I'd long since stopped needing that. But for my own closure. I wanted to stand in front of them as Lieutenant Colonel Morgan, decorated combat veteran, respected leader, successful woman. I wanted them to see that their rejection hadn't destroyed me. It had forged me into something stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. I submitted leave paperwork, booked a flight, and had my dress blues dry cleaned. If I was going to face my past, I was going in full armor. The uniform that represented everything I'd achieved without them would be my shield against whatever pain this reunion might bring. The flight home, though it wasn't really home anymore, just the place where I'd once lived, felt both endless and too short. I'd practiced what I might say, how I might act, but every scenario I imagined felt wrong. How do you greet a father who threw you out? How do you congratulate a brother who never once tried to contact you? How do you small talk with a mother who let you leave with garbage bags? I rented a car at the airport and drove through familiar streets that felt like a foreign country. The town had changed in 17 years. New developments where farms used to be, chain restaurants replacing local diners, a Starbucks on the corner where the old drugstore had been. But the bones were the same, the geography of my childhood intact enough to bring back memories I'd tried to bury. I drove past my high school, where I'd been the girl who tried too hard and never quite fit in. Past the grocery store where I'd worked, where my father had dismissed my first paycheck. Past the park where he'd taught me to ride a bike, back when I still believed fathers loved their daughters unconditionally. The church parking lot was full of expensive cars, the kind of vehicles that announced their owners had done well for themselves. I parked my rental and sat for a moment, breathing steadily, reminding myself who I was now. Not the rejected teenager, not the homeless girl. Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Morgan, commander of soldiers, bearer of medals, survivor of actual wars. I walked into the church 5 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start, late enough to avoid lengthy conversations, but early enough to not be disruptive. Heads turned as I entered, the dress blues doing their job of commanding attention and respect. I could hear whispers, see people trying to place me, wondering what military dignitary was attending this civilian wedding. I took a seat near the back on the bride's side, far enough from the family section to avoid immediate contact, but close enough to be seen. The church was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, elegant in its simplicity. Everything was perfect and polished, the kind of wedding that required significant money and planning. My mother saw me first. I watched her scanning the crowd from her front row seat, probably counting heads or checking that everything was in place. Her eyes passed over me, then snapped back, widening with recognition. She leaned over to whisper to someone. My sister, I realized, older but still recognizable. My sister turned, her hand going to her mouth when she saw me. Neither of them approached. Maybe they were too shocked. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they were hoping I was a mirage that would disappear if they looked away. I kept my eyes forward, my posture military straight, refusing to show any of the emotions churning in my chest. The music started and everyone stood for the bridal procession. My brother waited at the altar looking happy and confident, more mature than the teenager I remembered. When his bride appeared, his face lit up with genuine joy. They looked good together, well matched, the kind of couple that made sense. The ceremony was traditional. Readings about love, being patient and kind, vows about for better or worse, the exchange of rings that symbolized eternal commitment. I listened to words about family bonds and unconditional love and tried not to think about the irony of celebrating these concepts in front of someone who'd been denied them. When they kissed and turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, my brother's eyes found mine in the crowd. For a moment, his perfect smile cracked, replaced by something that looked like shock mixed with what might have been guilt. Then the moment passed, organ music swelled, and they walked down the aisle to begin their new life together. The receiving line was where I'd have to face them. I could have left then, skipped the reception, Made my point by showing up in uniform and disappearing. But that felt like running away, and I was done running from these people. I hung back, letting other guests go first. Watching my family interact with their friends and extended relatives. They looked prosperous, successful, the kind of family that had their lives together. My father had aged, his hair more grey than brown now, but he still carried himself with that authority I remembered, still commanded attention when he spoke. Finally, there was no one left between me and them. I stepped forward to face my brother and his new wife. 17 years of silence hanging between us like a physical barrier. "Catherine," my brother said, and his voice carried notes of surprise, confusion, maybe even happiness. "You came." "Congratulations," I replied, keeping my tone professional neutral. "You look happy." "This is Jessica," he said, introducing his bride, who was studying me with intelligent eyes that suggested she knew more about our family dynamics than her smile indicated. "Thank you for being here," Jessica said, and there was something in her tone that felt genuine. "It means a lot to have family present. Family." The word sat between us like an unexploded bomb. Were we still family? Could you be family with people who'd erased you from their lives? "It's a beautiful ceremony," I said, defaulting to safe pleasantries. "You look..." My brother paused, seemingly searching for words. "The uniform." "You're military?" "Army." "Lieutenant Colonel," I said simply, not elaborating on the 17 years of service that title represented. "That's amazing," Jessica said with what seemed like genuine admiration. "Thank you for your service." I nodded, accepting the thanks that had become automatic after years of hearing it, and moved on before the conversation could go deeper. There would be time for more at the reception. Or maybe there wouldn't. I still wasn't sure why I was here or what I hoped to accomplish. The country club reception was exactly what I'd expected from my family. Elegant, expensive, designed to impress. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, elaborate centerpieces that probably cost more than I'd made in a month as a waitress. A band played jazz standards while guests mingled with cocktails. I found my place card at a table near the back with what appeared to be distant relatives and family friends who didn't quite rate the important tables. That was fine. I hadn't expected to be seated with immediate family. I was lucky to be included at all. "Excuse me, dear," an elderly woman at my table said. "Are you military?" My late husband was Navy. "Army, ma'am." 17 years. "How wonderful. What do you do?" "Military police." "Currently serving as a battalion executive officer." We chatted pleasantly about her husband's service, about how the military had changed, about my deployments. It was easier than thinking about why I was really here. Easier than watching my family celebrate without acknowledging my presence. Then I saw him. My father, standing near the bar, holding court with a group of men his age. He looked older but still formidable, still the man whose approval I'd once craved like oxygen. He was gesturing animatedly, telling some story that had his audience laughing. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment I was 18 again, standing with garbage bags, and he was the man who'd decided I wasn't worth keeping. But then I remembered who I was now. Decorated officer, combat veteran, leader of soldiers. I straightened my shoulders and met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. He broke eye contact, turning back to his conversation, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew I was here. He knew he'd have to acknowledge me eventually. But for now, we both pretended the other didn't exist, maintaining the fiction that had kept our family functional for 17 years. Dinner was served, some kind of chicken dish that was probably delicious but tasted like sawdust in my mouth. I made polite conversation with my table mates, smiled at appropriate times, applauded when toasts were made. I was performing the role of wedding guest while feeling like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The speeches started with the best man, my brother's college roommate, telling funny stories about their friendship. Then the maid of honor, one of Jessica's sisters, talking about love and partnership. Normal wedding speeches that assumed normal family relationships. Then my father stood up, tapping his spoon against his champagne glass, commanding the room's attention with the same authority he'd always wielded. "Before we continue with the festivities," he began, his voice carrying across the reception hall, "I want to acknowledge someone special who's joined us tonight." My stomach clenched. I hadn't expected him to acknowledge me publicly. Had hoped to get through this without direct confrontation. "My daughter has come a long way to be here," he continued. And there was something in his tone that made every muscle in my body tense. In fact, if it wasn't for charity, she probably wouldn't be here at all. The words landed like a slap. Charity. In one word, he'd reduced everything I'd achieved to accepting handouts. Made it sound like I was some kind of beggar who'd needed help to attend my own brother's wedding. Dismissed 17 years of service, combat deployments, medals and rank as if they were nothing. The room had gone quiet, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd as people tried to understand what they'd just heard. Some tragedy in the family? Perhaps? Some prodigal daughter story that would end with reconciliation? I sat frozen, my hands clenched under the table, 17 years of carefully built dignity crumbling under the weight of public humiliation. He'd found a way to make me small again, to reduce me to the unwanted daughter even while I sat there in my dress blues with ribbons, and medals that represented more sacrifice than he'd ever understand. But then something unexpected happened. Jessica, my brother's new wife, this woman I'd met minutes ago, stood up. She moved with quiet authority to the DJ's table and took the microphone. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, cutting through the uncomfortable silence with surgical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "before we continue, I'd like you all to please rise for Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Morgan." The correction was small but devastating. She'd heard my introduction to my brother, had paid attention to the rank on my uniform, and was now making sure everyone else did too. The guests rose uncertainly, many of them clearly confused, but following the bride's lead on her wedding day. "Lieutenant Colonel Morgan has served our country with distinction for 17 years, Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. She's completed 3 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, earning a Bronze Star for valor when she saved a soldier's life under enemy fire. She commands a battalion of 800 soldiers who trust her with their lives. She's one of the youngest women ever to achieve her rank, and she did it all through merit, determination and sacrifice most of us can't even imagine. The silence in the room had shifted from uncomfortable to attentive. People were looking at me with new eyes, seeing not whatever story my father had tried to tell, but the truth Jessica was revealing with quiet authority. "We are honored," she continued, emphasizing the word, "that Colonel Morgan could take time from her duties to celebrate with us today. Her presence here isn't charity, it's a gift to our family, one we probably don't deserve after 17 years of silence." My father's face had gone from red to white. He stood there with his champagne glass still raised in that mock toast, but the power had shifted completely. His attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. The room now saw him not as a proud father, but as a man who'd tried to diminish his daughter's extraordinary achievements. "So please," Jessica concluded, "join me in showing proper respect to a woman who's dedicated her life to protecting our freedoms, who's earned through blood and sacrifice what most of us take for granted. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Morgan." The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine. The kind of recognition that comes when people realize they're in the presence of someone who's done something meaningful with their life. I stood because military protocol demanded it when being honored. But inside, I was struggling to process what had just happened. This woman I'd never met, who'd married into our dysfunctional family just hours ago, had stood up to my father in front of 200 guests. She'd used her position as the bride, the one person who couldn't be challenged on her own wedding day, to defend me against his cruelty. It was the kind of protection I'd never received from my actual family. I nodded once in acknowledgement, then sat back down as the applause continued. Across the room, I could see my father finally lowering his glass, his toast abandoned, his moment of petty triumph transformed into public embarrassment. He sat heavily in his chair, and for the first time in my life, he looked small to me, small and mean and utterly diminished by his own pettiness. Jessica caught my eye from the head table and nodded slightly, a gesture of solidarity between women, who understood that some battles had to be fought in ball gowns and pearls instead of combat gear. She'd probably hear about this later, probably face my father's anger for embarrassing him. But she'd done it anyway because it was right. The rest of the reception took on a different tone. People approached my table wanting to hear about my service, my deployments, my experiences. Veterans in attendance sought me out to share their own stories. Parents asked advice about their children who were considering military service. I'd gone from being the family shame to being someone worth knowing, all because one brave woman had refused to let a lie stand. My mother approached as the evening wound down. She looked older, more fragile than I remembered, and there was something in her eyes that might have been regret. "Catherine," she said, my name sounding rusty in her mouth after so many years of not saying it. "You look, well, thank you," I said, not giving her anything more to work with. "Your father, he—" She paused, seeming to search for words that would explain 17 years of absence. "He never told us you'd joined the military. We didn't know what had happened to you. You could have looked," I said quietly. "My name's been in various military publications over the years. Promotion announcements, deployment notices. The Bronze Star was written up in several papers. If you'd wanted to know, you could have found out." She flinched at the truth of it. They hadn't looked because they hadn't wanted to know. It was easier to pretend I'd just disappeared than to acknowledge they'd thrown away a daughter who'd gone on to accomplish more than they'd ever imagined. "I'm proud of you," she said finally, the words seeming to physically pain her. I should have said that a long time ago. Should have done a lot of things differently. "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." She waited, perhaps hoping I'd offer forgiveness or absolution, some words that would make the guilt easier to bear. But I had nothing to give her. 17 years of absence couldn't be erased by one conversation at a wedding reception. "Your sister would like to speak with you," she said when it became clear I wasn't going to make this easier for her. "And your brother, when you're ready." "I'll think about it," I said, which was more than I'd planned to offer. She walked away looking defeated, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow acknowledgement that some wounds are too deep to heal with words. My father never approached me directly. He spent the rest of the reception avoiding my side of the room, his earlier bravado completely deflated. But I could feel him watching me. Could see him trying to reconcile the powerful woman in uniform with the teenager he'd thrown out with garbage bags. As I prepared to leave, Jessica intercepted me near the door. She'd changed from her wedding dress into an elegant traveling outfit. "Preparing for their honeymoon?" "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it couldn't have been easy." "Thank you for what you did," I replied. "You didn't have to do that. He's your father-in-law now. You'll have to deal with the consequences." She smiled, and there was steel in it. "I grew up with a father very much like yours. Men who need to make others small so they can feel big. I learned young that the only way to deal with bullies is to stand up to them publicly. He'll be angry, but he'll also be careful around me now. He knows I see him for what he is." "You're good for my brother," I said, meaning it. "He needs someone strong. He's a good man who's spent too many years trying to earn approval that was never going to come freely," she said. "Sound familiar? We've been in therapy together, working through family trauma. Your name comes up a lot. He carries tremendous guilt about not defending you, about choosing the path of least resistance. He wants to reconnect when you're ready. No pressure, just the door's open." "I'll think about it," I said again. "That's all anyone can ask. Can I have your email? I'd like to stay in touch if you're willing." I gave it to her, surprising myself. But there was something about Jessica that felt trustworthy. Like she understood broken families and the complicated process of deciding which relationships were worth salvaging. I left the reception without saying goodbye to anyone else. As I drove back to my hotel, I thought about the evening's events. I'd come expecting closure, possibly confrontation. I hadn't expected an ally, hadn't expected someone to defend me, hadn't expected to feel anything other than vindicated distance. But Jessica's intervention had cracked something open, some door I'd sealed shut for self-protection. Not enough to walk through yet, but enough to let in a sliver of light. Back at Fort Bragg, life continued as normal. The wedding felt like something I'd dreamed, too surreal to fully integrate into my daily reality. But then Jessica's emails started coming. They were casual at first, updates about married life, questions about military structure for her high school students, but gradually they became more personal, more revealing about the family dynamics I'd missed. "Your father barely speaks to me now," she wrote 3 months after the wedding. "But that's fine. I've made it clear I won't tolerate his behavior, and he doesn't know how to handle someone he can't intimidate. Your mother, on the other hand, has been surprisingly warm. I think she's relieved someone finally stood up to him." Through Jessica, I learned how my absence had affected the family in ways I'd never imagined. My brother had struggled with depression, feeling guilty about inheriting the favoritism I'd been denied. My sister had developed an eating disorder, trying to disappear into the perfect daughter role she'd felt forced to play. My mother had started therapy in her 60s, finally acknowledging the dysfunction she'd enabled for decades. "None of this is your fault," Jessica wrote when sharing these updates. "But your leaving created a vacuum that forced everyone to see the dysfunction they'd been ignoring. You were the family problem that let everyone else pretend things were normal. Without you to blame, they had to face the real issues." I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me was grimly satisfied that my absence had consequences. Part of me grieved for siblings who'd suffered in different ways from the same poisoned well of conditional love. Part of me felt nothing at all, my emotional investment in these people cauterized by years of distance. A year after the wedding, Jessica called with news that changed everything. "Your father had a heart attack," she said without preamble. "Triple bypass surgery. He's stable now, recovering, but it was close. Very close." I sat with that information, waiting to feel something. Fear, concern, satisfaction. But all I felt was a distant acknowledgement that mortality comes for everyone. Even fathers who seem invincible in their cruelty. "How's the family handling it?" I asked, defaulting to practical questions. "Your mother's a wreck. Your siblings are flying in. And—" she paused. "He's been asking for you." "No," I said immediately. "I'm not doing a deathbed reconciliation. If he wants to make peace, he can do it when he's not using mortality as emotional manipulation." "I understand," Jessica said. "I told them you might not come, and that they need to respect that. But I wanted you to know. In case you change your mind." I didn't change my mind. I didn't visit him in the hospital or during his recovery. But I did send flowers through Jessica. A generic arrangement with a card that simply said, "Wishing you a speedy recovery." See, it was more than he deserved, but exactly as much as I could give without betraying myself. I'd learned that you can wish someone well from a distance without inviting them back into your life. According to Jessica's updates, the heart attack changed my father in ways the family found unsettling. He was quieter, more reflective, less quick to criticize. He'd apparently told my mother he had regrets, though he couldn't seem to articulate them specifically. He'd started reading philosophy of all things, searching for meaning in the time he had left. "He's trying to understand where he went wrong," Jessica reported. "But he's looking for external answers instead of internal ones. Still can't admit the problem was him." 18 months after his heart attack, I received something I never expected, a letter from my father. It came through military mail, addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Catherine Morgan in handwriting I recognized despite nearly 2 decades of absence. I stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it. Part of me afraid it would contain more cruelty, part afraid it would contain an apology I wasn't ready to process. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I opened it. "Catherine," it began, using my name for the first time in 19 years. "I know I have no right to contact you after all these years. I won't blame you if you throw this letter away unread. But I need to say some things, and I'm running out of time to say them." The letter was 3 pages of yellow legal pad paper, his handwriting shakier than I remembered but still recognizably his. "I was wrong," he wrote. "Wrong to throw you out, wrong to treat you as less than your siblings, wrong to make my love conditional on your obedience, wrong about everything that mattered." He talked about his own father, a man I'd never met who'd died before I was born. A man who'd apparently been even harsher, even more demanding, even less capable of showing love without conditions. "I was raised to believe that love was earned through compliance," he wrote, "that children who didn't conform were failures, that fathers who didn't maintain absolute authority were weak. I never questioned it until it cost me my daughter." He admitted to following my career from a distance after the wedding, searching for mentions of my name in military publications, feeling pride he had no right to claim when he read about my promotions and commendations. "Jessica showed me articles about your Bronze Star," he wrote, "about saving that soldier's life. I cried, Catherine. Cried because my daughter was a hero, and I'd thrown her away like she was nothing. Cried because I'd been so wrong about who you were, who you could become." The letter went on to detail his regrets, his recognition of the damage he'd done not just to me, but to the entire family. He acknowledged that my siblings had suffered too, that my mother had been diminished by his demands, that the family had been broken long before I left. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he concluded. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for reconciliation or a relationship or anything you're not willing to give. I just needed you to know that you were right to leave, right to become who you are without us, right to refuse my efforts to make you small. You became extraordinary despite me, and perhaps because you escaped me. I'm proud of who you are. even though I have no right to that pride. You were never the problem, Catherine. I was. I'm sorry it took me 19 years and a heart attack to see it. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in a box with my medals and tried not to think about it. But it haunted me in quiet moments. This admission of fault from a man who'd never admitted being wrong about anything. I didn't respond for 2 months. When I finally did, I kept it brief and clinical. I received your letter. I appreciate your acknowledgement of past mistakes. I've built a good life and found my own family in the military. I wish you peace with your choices as I've found peace with mine. Catherine. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was what I could offer while maintaining the boundaries that protected me from further harm. We exchanged a few more letters over the following year. Careful surface-level communications about safe topics. He told me about books he was reading. I told him about places I'd travelled for work. We avoided the deep wounds, the 19 years of absence, the family dynamics that had driven us apart. When I was promoted to full colonel 2 years later, Jessica sent him the announcement from the military publication. He wrote a brief note of congratulations that managed to express pride without claiming credit, respect without expectation of response. It felt honest in a way our relationship had never been. Your achievements stand on their own merit, he wrote. I'm glad you found in the military what you couldn't find at home. Unconditional respect based on your actions, not arbitrary expectations. The family I'd lost had been replaced by something stronger. My military brothers and sisters who'd bled beside me in combat. My soldiers who trusted me with their lives. My fellow officers who judged me on competence, not compliance. This was the family I'd chosen, and they'd chosen me in return. Looking back now at 43 years old, Colonel Catherine Morgan, commander of thousands, holder of medals, survivor of wars, both foreign and domestic, I can see the path clearly. Every rejection had pushed me towards something better. Every moment of conditional love had taught me to love unconditionally. Every attempt to make me small had forced me to grow beyond their limitations. The 18-year-old girl with garbage bags didn't know she was about to embark on an extraordinary journey. She just knew she had to survive the next day, the next week, the next month. But survival became strength, strength became leadership, and leadership became a life of purpose I never could have imagined. My father was right about one thing in his letter. I became who I am not, despite him, but because escaping him forced me to discover my own potential. His rejection was the push I needed to stop seeking approval from someone incapable of giving it freely. The wedding that had brought us back into contact hadn't healed our wounds, but it had provided something else, perspective. I could see them now as flawed humans rather than mythical figures. My father as a damaged man passing on damage. My mother as a woman too afraid to protect her children from their father. My siblings as fellow survivors who'd chosen different coping strategies. I could even feel compassion for them from a safe distance. But compassion doesn't mean reconciliation. Understanding doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness, if it comes at all, doesn't mean reopening doors better left closed. Some families break beyond repair, and that's okay. Sometimes the best thing you can do is build a new life from the pieces. Create your own family from people who choose you. Find your worth in service to something greater than personal drama. The girl who'd been thrown out at 18 had become a woman who couldn't be diminished by anyone. The rejection that had felt like death had actually been birth, painful, traumatic, but ultimately necessary for becoming who I was meant to be. And that's the real story here. Not about revenge or vindication or proving anyone wrong. It's about discovering that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for our greatest strengths. That rejection can be redirection. That family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. I still have the letter my father sent, tucked away with my medals and commendations. Not as a trophy or a vindication, but as a reminder that even the deepest wounds can eventually scar over. That people can change even if it's too late to matter. That you can wish someone well from a distance without letting them close enough to hurt you again. The military gave me what my biological family never could. Unconditional acceptance based on merit. Respect earned through action, bonds forged in extremity that transcend everything else. My fellow soldiers don't care who my father is or whether he approves of me. They care whether I'll have their backs in a firefight, whether I'll make decisions that bring them home alive. Whether I've earned the rank I wear through competence and sacrifice. That's real family. That's real love. That's the life I built from the ashes of rejection. So to anyone listening who's been thrown away, rejected, told you're not enough, know this. Their inability to see your worth says everything about their limitations and nothing about your potential. Sometimes the family you're born into is just the launching pad for finding the family you're meant to have. Sometimes charity isn't accepting handouts. It's extending grace to people who failed you while maintaining boundaries that protect your peace. It's succeeding not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. It's building a life so full that their absence becomes irrelevant. That's my story. The girl with garbage bags who became a colonel. The rejected daughter who found her real family in foxholes and forward operating bases. The 18-year-old who thought her life was ending when it was actually just beginning. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong who doubted you? Did standing your ground change how others saw you, or more importantly, how you saw yourself? Share your story in the comments. I read every one, and you're not alone in this journey. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever had to build yourself up after someone tore you down, if you've ever discovered that rejection was actually redirection towards something better, please subscribe. Your story matters. Your survival matters. Your strength matters. Because that's what this is really about. Not the family that threw me away, but the woman who refused to stay thrown away. Not the father who said I was nothing, but the colonel who proved that nothing can become something extraordinary when given the chance to grow without constraints. The 18 years of silence between being thrown out and that wedding weren't empty years. They were years of becoming, of building, of proving to myself that I was worth the effort even when no one else believed it. And that's the greatest victory of all. Not the rank, or the medals, or the recognition, but the knowledge that I am enough, have always been enough, will always be enough, regardless of who recognizes it. That's the real power. That's the real victory. That's the real story. The girl they threw away didn't break. She became unbreakable. And that transformation was worth every moment of pain it took to achieve it.